all the other colleague faculty members, and they join me in greeting you a wonderful good morning and a great day ahead. So today morning, the first session, we have a very interesting topic, and though the legislation is not as old as new, but still the concepts of the legislation that we are going to discuss today is quite new, and its implementation uh, is being done in our country on a very large scale and needs lots of attention from not only from the legislators but from the executive as well as from the judiciary. So we will be discussing on the Biological Diversity Act 2002 today. And to talk about the Biological Diversity Act, we have none other than the Secretary, National Biodiversity Authority, Shri J. Justin Mohan. Sir is an Indian Forest Service officer of the 1999 batch, born to the Kerala cadre. Before joining as the National Biodiversity Secretary, National Biodiversity Authority, he was heading the Kerala Soil Survey and Soil Conservation Department, Groundwater Department, and the State Horticulture Mission concurrently since September 2015. He has also served in the Forest Department in different capacities as Divisional Forest Officer of Munnar and Palakkad Divisions, Wildlife Warden and Park Director of Silent Valley National Park, and also as Conservator of Forests of the High Range Circle in Kerala. He was also heading the Kerala Agriculture Department when the state faced the unprecedented floods in the months of July-August in 2018. And he played a major role to revive the agriculture sector post-flood scenario by assisting the affected farmers through special package that was sanctioned by the central government. He also served as the first project director of 1,840 crore Kutanad project involving comprehensive development of the distressed Kutanad agrarian ecosystem. For those who don't know Kutanad, it is an area in Kerala which is below sea level. And in 2011, Government of India appointed him as the first secretary in the High Commission of India, Colombo, to coordinate the relief, rehabilitation and development of war-affected families in Sri Lanka. During his 3-year tenure there, he implemented more than 50 major projects worth rupees 7,000 crores in Sri Lanka, including the Indian Housing Project that involved construction of 50,000 houses for the benefit of conflict-affected communities in Sri Lanka. After completing his schooling from the Campion Higher Secondary School, Trichy, in 1990, Sir graduated in agriculture and completed his post-graduation in agricultural microbiology with a fellowship from IC, Indian Council for Research, Agriculture Research, and also secured a Jawaharlal Nehru University scholarship for pursuing post-graduation in biotechnology. So Sir is also my senior from the university. Sir also completed his bachelor's degree in law from Kerala University and master's degree in law from the National Law School of India, University Bangalore. He also holds a master's degree in management and public policy from Indian School of Business, Mohali, and an MBA degree from Alagappa University. Sir is also a recipient of the Global Tiger Forum Award, Wildlife Trust of India Award, and the Nilgiri Wildlife Prize, which is given for contribution to wildlife conservation. Sir has also received the PCCF's Distinguished Certificate Award for contribution to forest management. He is also a recipient of the Scotch Award on the Soil Survey and Soil Conservation Survey Department for developing a mobile app known as Manna. Manna means soil, which facilitated testing of soils and best practices in that particular type of soil. When at the Science Congress, State Science Congress in 2017, when he was heading the Agriculture Department as its director. Sir is also the author of Management Plan, which is a main tool by which forests are managed in the country, forest and wildlife are managed in the country. He has authored a management plan for Palakkad Forest Division as well as for Munnar Forest Division, and he is also the author of several popular articles in forestry, wildlife, agriculture and soils. And Sir is also proactively involved in drafting amendments to the current Biological Diversity Act 2002. So with this brief introduction, sir, we have the August participants of the 2 days online course on role of judiciary in forest and wildlife, sir. So we have the honorable judges and magistrates of the district and the subordinate courts from across the country. We have a few faculty of the judicial academies from various states, as well as we have some probationary judicial officers also, sir. So, sir, yesterday we had an introduction into the various legislations and legal issues that pertain to the management of forest and wildlife in India and their evolution. Sri Uttam Kumar, sir, discussed about the Indian Forest Act. Then there was an insight into the judgments of Supreme Court and High Court in Environment, Forest and Wildlife, followed by a session on Forest Conservation Act, sir. And sir, the day begins with a wonderful topic with a wonderful person like you, sir. So over to you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Abhilash. I really thank CASFOS for giving an opportunity for making a presentation before a very elite audience. In fact, I am extremely thrilled to address the judicial officers, particularly the judges and magistrates of various courts of India, on a subject which is lesser known in India, but there is a lot of impact and ramifications on this particular act, but it is unfortunately not that popular among the various stakeholders and in fact among the judiciary as well. So today I would be taking you into various sections of the Biological Diversity Act and give you a overall view of what is happening and what are the various provisions that have been provided in the act and how it has or it will impact various stakeholders and how the judiciary can play a major role in effectively implementing this act. So I have a 30-slide presentation. One second. Okay. So I have a 30-slide presentation. In fact, a wealth of information about biodiversity and biodiversity laws and various judicial orders or judgments have been placed in our website, that is www.nbaindia.org. You are all requested to peruse this website and get a lot of valuable information on biological diversity as a whole. So this presentation will revolve around primarily on the Biological Diversity Act, but I thought I will just give you a brief introduction about what is biodiversity and why it should be conserved and what is the legal framework for biodiversity conservation in India. And we will go section-wise on this Biological Diversity Act. I have already requested Abhilash to ensure that all the participants have the act in hand so that you can also follow my presentation. And then we conclude this presentation with the challenges that we face and what is the way forward. And then we open up for a discussion based on my presentation. So when I tell biodiversity is nothing but all the life forms which one sees on Earth, Mother Earth. So why the word biodiversity is important? Because for the judiciary also, there will be a lot of questions on whether a particular resource is a biological resource or not. In fact, in 2013, a panchayat named Eklihara Panchayat in Madhya Pradesh filed a case before the Honorable National Green Tribunal, Bhopal, and questioned that coal should be declared as a bioresource because the western coal fields had been extracting coal from that panchayat area and had made a lot of profit. They arrived at a profit of about 1,470 crore. And the Biodiversity Management Committee or the local body wanted a portion of the benefit to be transferred to them as part of the Biological Diversity Act. But the Honorable NJT Bhopal ruled that coal cannot be considered as a biological resource. That was a landmark judgment in 2013. Because for a biological resource, there are certain characters that has to be fulfilled, and coal does not fulfill that character. And therefore, the court ruled that coal cannot be declared as a biological resource. So, but having said that, biodiversity is very, very important for Mother Earth to sustain itself, because if you see, every life form on Mother Earth is dependent on another life form through a complicated food web. So if a particular species is overexploited by a particular stakeholder, then that may lead to extinction of that species, and then that could in fact lead to extinction of several other species. So it is very, very important to preserve this well-preserved nature food web, so that every species lives in their own domain, and no species gets extinct due to overexploitation. So for humanity as a whole, preserving this interdependence on organisms is very, very critical, and therefore biodiversity has to be preserved. Similarly, if you see the modern day agriculture, many of the cultivated crops are actually domesticated from wild forms, which were in previous centuries, they would have been in forest areas. Still, there are a lot of wild forms with rich genetic resources, which have a lot of potential for the future. And therefore, the biodiversity in the forest areas as well has to be conserved. Also, forests as a whole, which is considered to be a repository of rich biodiversity, also contributes to changes in hydraulic patterns and climatic changes. Whatever rain we get or whatever groundwater we have is all because of the ecosystem services that is coming out from the forest areas, and therefore the forest wealth has to be conserved as part of biodiversity conservation. Similarly, if you notice, in developing countries like India, our traditional knowledge has a lot of value. In fact, our rural communities, the forest dwelling communities, the tribal communities have a lot of traditional knowledge associated with biological resources, which has been preserved over centuries. So suddenly some multinational companies should not come and silently take away this traditional knowledge and start exploiting it for commercial purpose without the knowledge of these communities. So the Biological Diversity Act is one act which actually protects the traditional knowledge which is available with the rural communities and the forest dwelling communities. Also, since humans are considered to be in the apex of the biodiversity network on Mother Earth, it is our moral and ethical duty to ensure that every animal or every species or every plant has their own domain to live in, and we have no right to encroach into their domain. And also biodiversity, as you know, is not only a source of livelihood for several people. Also, it is also a source of life for humans, because without biodiversity, we will not be able to live. For example, in the case of tribal communities living inside forest areas or living around forest ecosystems, their entire livelihood depends on collection or gathering of various shrubs and herbs from the forest areas. For their livelihood, they collect and then they hand it over to the nearby tribal cooperative societies, which are then procured by the companies through various traders. Similarly, for the fishermen, fishing is their livelihood for them. Therefore, every form of biodiversity has to be preserved for our own livelihood as well as for our own living. Now, so far as biodiversity conservation in India is concerned, today there are about 31 legislations that have been enacted in India. Broadly, that covers or touches upon each type of biodiversity, but prominent among them come from the forest jurisdiction, because various laws have been enacted. The Indian Forest Act, I heard that you were exposed to this act yesterday by Uttam Kumar Sharma. So similarly, the Wildlife Protection Act, the Forest Conservation Act, these acts actually help to conserve our forest ecosystems. Similarly, so far as agriculture is concerned, the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, the Destructive Insects and Pests Act, the Seeds Act are some of the acts that help to preserve the agricultural biodiversity. Similarly, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act actually helps to protect the welfare of the animals. And there is a Fisheries Act 1987, Central Act, which helps to protect or conserve our fisheries resources. And every state have their own act to protect their fisheries resource in their own jurisdiction. Similarly, an outcome of the Stockholm Conference in 1972 saw the enactment of three major legislations, that is the Water Act, Air Act, and finally the Environment Protection Act in 1986, which broadly helped to protect or conserve the environment. And then whatever biodiversity was left out was actually in fact broadly covered under the Biological Diversity Act. And this is the only act which also gave lot of importance to protect the rural knowledge, that is the traditional knowledge associated with the biological resources. Along with the act which was enacted in 2002, the biological diversity rules was framed in 2004, and then we also have ABS regulations which actually help in determining the benefit sharing between the user of the biological resource that has to be shared with the providers of the biological resources. Now, I would be taking you into the various sections of the BD Act. The BD Act is an act comprising of 12 chapters and 65 sections. So, if you are having the act in hand, it will be great if you can follow my presentation with your bare act. Now, before I move to the preamble and sections, I would also like to indicate to you that who are the major stakeholders of this act. So there are three different types of stakeholders. One is the providers of the biological resource, the people who are actually supplying the raw material or the resources, biological resources to the users. Prominently, they are the forest dwelling communities, the tribal communities, the rural communities, particularly the farmers, the research institutions which actually provide microorganisms, foundation seeds to various companies for commercial exploitation. This group forms one category of stakeholders. Now, the users of biological diversity form the other group of stakeholders. They are primarily research institutions which undertake research on biological resources. There are also companies which actually utilize biological resources to come up with a lot of products for the benefit of humanity. And also the people who actually depend on biodiversity for their own livelihood and for consuming biodiversity as a common practice. Now, the third stakeholder category is the institutions. The Biological Diversity Act has a three-tier institutional framework, one at the national level, that is the National Biodiversity Authority. Then every state has a state biodiversity board, and every union territory has a union territory biodiversity council. And at the grassroots level, that is at the local body level, every local body is expected to constitute a biodiversity management committee. Now, coming to the preamble of this act. See, India is one of the 196 parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was agreed upon by these 196 countries in 1992. The text was actually signed on 22nd May 1992. That is why every year on 22nd May, we are celebrating that day as the International Day for Biodiversity. The Convention on Biological Diversity is a UN convention. It had three broad objectives. One is the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of biological diversity, and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits that arise out of the use of biological diversity. So that means that a person who is using a biological resource with a commercial motive will have to share a small portion of their benefit with the people who actually contributed the raw material for producing his products. So the CBD insisted that every country who has become party to the convention will have to enact a law in their own country to safeguard their resources and also ensure that the people who are actually providing these resources are suitably compensated. So accordingly, the Biological Diversity Act was enacted in 2002 as part of India's commitment to the International Convention, and whatever was the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity was taken as the objectives of the Act. So coming to the first chapter, so that deals with short title, extent and commencement. We know that this act is titled as the Biological Diversity Act 2002 and it extends throughout the geographical area of India. It's also referred as Act 18 of 2003 and it came into force from 1/10/2003. That is 1st October 2003 when the National Biodiversity Authority was actually set up in Chennai. Then the next definition, as usual, is the definition. Next section is definition section. Definition. So I would actually focus on the important definitions which are actually pertaining to the judiciary. The first definition which I would want to discuss is the definition on biological resources. The Act defines biological resources as all plants, animals, microorganisms, and their parts and byproducts with actual or potential use or value, but does not include human genetic material. So that is very important. So, so far as human genetic material is concerned, though it has a life, there is a DNA involved, but still the Act and the Convention has excluded human genetic material. So far as the BD Act is concerned, it has also excluded value added products. So what is value added product? That is again defined in section 2P. These are products which may contain portions or extracts of plants and animals in unrecognizable and physically inseparable form. That is actually if I am a company and I am taking a raw material, say a medicinal plant or a microorganism, and I am coming up with a commercial product, that product constitutes a value added product. So the company is expected to share a portion of the benefit to the people who actually helped in supplying the raw material. But if a third party accesses this value added product and uses it as a raw material, then they are not liable to pay any benefit sharing. That is what it indicates. So a value added product is not treated as a biological resource. But many a times what happens is the companies, they self-interpret their products as a value added product. For example, neem oil. Neem oil is extracted from seeds, but many a times companies come to us and then they complain that we are producing a value added product, so we should be excluded from any benefit sharing agreement. So that is not the point. The law states that the extracts, byproducts or derivatives constitute raw material. But when these extracts, raw material, byproducts or derivatives are used to produce a value added product, and if that product is used as a raw material, then the party using the raw material need not pay any benefit sharing. So that is the point. Then the next definition is commercial utilization. So who are the people who have to comply with the Act, who have obligations to fulfill under the Act? So if the end user of the biological resource for commercial utilization, such as drugs, that is medicine and so on, industrial enzymes, food flavors, fragrances, cosmetics, emulsifiers, oleoresins, colors, extracts and genes used for crops and livestock through genetic intervention. So anyone who is actually involved in any of these processes are liable to come under the purview of the Biological Diversity Act. But it does not include conventional breeding or traditional practice in any use, particularly in agriculture, horticulture, poultry, dairy farming, animal husbandry or beekeeping. So the Act has excluded farmers who are involved in agriculture, horticulture, poultry, dairy farming, animal husbandry as well as apiculture. So many a times what happens is the seed companies who are actually involved in conventional breeding to come up with a variety, they make lot of profit based on a foundation seed or a land race or a fork variety that would have been provided by a rural community or a farming community or by some research institution. But they come and claim to us telling that we are also adopting conventional breeding, so we should be excluded from the purview of the act. The act is very clear on that, that if you are having a commercial motive, if you are making commercial profit out of a particular biological resource, then you will have to come under the purview of the act by paying a small portion of your benefits to the people who have actually supplied the raw material. Similarly, the Act also has defined biosurvey and bioutilization and also the research. So biosurvey and bioutilization is a lower level of activity where a person or an institution or a company is involved in survey or collection of species or subspecies or genes or components or extracts of biological resource for any purpose that includes characterization, inventorization, and bioassay. So if any of these activities have a commercial motive, then they will have to come under the purview of the Act. Similarly, as per section 2M, which defines the research, if there is any study or systematic investigation of any biological resource or technological application that uses biological systems, living organisms or derivatives thereof to make or modify products or process or any use. So this is a higher level of research that happens in the laboratories. So this also is a regulated activity under the Act. So if you see broadly, the Act regulates three types of activities. One is commercial utilization. Second is biosurvey and bioutilization with the commercial intent. Third is research. So these three activities are broadly regulated under the purview of the Act. Then the other definition under 2G is fair and equitable sharing of benefits. That means the sharing of benefits as determined by National Biodiversity Authority under section 21. Many a times what happens is companies approach the judiciary telling that only NBA has the powers to fix this benefit sharing. State biodiversity boards do not have the powers. It is not so. It is a wrong interpretation of the Act. The Act is very clear that the NBA will broadly come up with a guideline on how a benefit sharing has to be determined. And that broad guideline has to be followed across the country. That means every state cannot fix the benefit sharing based on their own terms and conditions. It has to be in consensus. It has to be based on a guideline notified by the National Biodiversity Authority. That is what it means. So the other definitions are self-explanatory. So I am moving to the second chapter. I request all the participants to closely be with me on this chapter, because unless you understand chapter 2, you will not be able to follow the other chapters, particularly section 3, 4, 5 and 6. You have to pay attention, otherwise you will not be able to follow the other chapters. So coming to section 3, the Act says that certain persons have to take approval for undertaking certain activities from the National Biodiversity Authority. Without the approval of NBA, if a person is undertaking any activity, regulated activity under section 3, then it constitutes an offence. So far as offence is concerned, I will discuss elaborately in 55, but offences are really very harsh, because an offence under section 3 amounts to a very serious offence, and the offender or a violator can be imprisoned for up to 5 years. So, section 3 is very, very important. So, in order to categorize who are the people who have to take the approval from NBA, the section 3 also categorizes the one group of person, which we call it as category A or category 1. That is any person who is not a citizen of India. Means he must be a foreigner. or any non-resident citizen of India, NRI. By NRI, we can take the definition as prescribed under the Income Tax Act. So he may be holding an Indian passport, but if he is having an NRI status and he is either using biological resource obtained from India for research or commercial utilization, then he will have to take the approval from NBA. Similarly, any body corporate, that means a company which is incorporated outside India, or if the company is registered in India, but has a non-Indian participation in its share capital or management. So, for example, a company which is a listed company, it may be owned by an Indian, but there may be a foreign shareholding in that company. Similarly, in the management, there may be foreigners. So then all these group of people will be categorized under section 3(2) of the Act. So many a times overseas citizens of India also come to us and tell that, sir, we have been doing business in India, thinking that we will be treated on par with the citizens of India. Actually, overseas citizens of India are actually given certain privileges. But so far as the BD Act is concerned, they are treated under section 3(2) of the Act. So all those people who are covered under section 3(2) will have to take the approval of the National Biodiversity Authority. All those people who do not come under this section, that is pure Indian citizens or Indian companies where there is no foreign participation in the share capital or management, they are all covered under section 7 of the Act. So these people will have to take the approval from the state biodiversity boards or the union territory biodiversity councils. I am sure that you are following section 3(2). So this is very important because other sections will be revolving around this section 3(2) and section 7. Now I move to section 4. So if I am conducting a research and I want to transfer a research to a section 3(2) entity, then I will have to take the approval of the National Biodiversity Authority. Without approval, if you are transferring a research result to a section 3(2) person or a company, then it constitutes an offense. But the Act has excluded certain things like publication of a research paper or dissemination of knowledge in a seminar or a workshop. That will not attract the provisions of section 4. Coming to section 5, section 3 and 4 does not apply to collaborative research projects undertaken by government institutions or government sponsored institutions with any other institutions abroad. So if there is a collaborative project and if that project is happening between one institution in India, government institution or government sponsored institution, and a similar institution abroad, and if that project is actually approved by a state government or central government, then under section 5, they are completely exempted from taking any approval. Coming to section 6, this pertains to IPRs, intellectual property rights. Application for IPRs not to be made without the approval of NBA if the invention is based on a research or information on a biological resource obtained from India. So if I as a person want to take a patent within India or outside India based on a biological resource, it must be a product or a process. Then before getting the patent, I will have to take the approval of the National Biodiversity Authority. Today we have an agreement with the patent office. So a person who is approaching the patent office will be informed to get the approval from NBA. So without the NBA's approval, the patent will not be granted. But many a times foreign countries grant patents on Indian biological resources. So that is becoming a issue nowadays. And we in NBA, because we are the only nodal office in the country to grant approvals or oppose grant of approvals of patents abroad. So we are closely monitoring grant of patents abroad. on any product or process. If a person is not taking approval of NBA, then it constitutes an offense. So coming to section 7, it is just covering the people, persons or entities or companies that have to take the approval from the state biodiversity boards. So every state will have a state biodiversity board. So no person who is a citizen of India or a body corporate which is registered in India shall obtain any biological resource for commercial utilization, biosurvey and bioutilization, for commercial utilization, except without giving prior intimation to the state biodiversity board. So two things I would like to highlight here. One is that the role of SBB is limited only to two. One is commercial utilization, second is biosurvey and bioutilization. They cannot give any approval for research because Indians are completely exempted from research activity. So if I am an Indian or an Indian institution or a Indian association or an organization undertaking any research activity, I need not take any approval from either NBA or state biodiversity board. Only if I am a section 3 to entity, I have to take approval from NBA for research. Again, another point here is, so far as NBA is concerned, it is a prior approval has to be required, is required before undertaking any regulated activity. But in the case of SBB, the word prior intimation to the state biodiversity board has been provided. That means when a company is accessing a biological resource, it has to intimate the SBB, and the SBB will actually regulate it by fixing a benefit sharing agreement between the user and the state biodiversity board. But many a times what happens is the stakeholders, particularly the purely Indian stakeholders, actually have approached courts telling that SBBs have no powers to regulate biodiversity access or fix benefit sharing under the provisions of the Act. So this has been adjudicated by the Uttarakhand High Court, which I will be discussed in due course. So so far as the BD Act is concerned, the State Biodiversity Board has all the powers to regulate access to biological resources and also to levy benefit sharing, because section 7 has to be linked with section 23B and section 24 too. Similarly, provisions of this Act shall not apply to local people, communities of the area, including growers and cultivators of biodiversity, and waits and hakims who have been practicing indigenous medicine. So people in the rural areas are completely exempted from the purview of the Act when it comes to their livelihood. Coming to chapter 3, it is pertaining to the National Biodiversity Authority. Establishment of the NBA is broadly covered under section 8. There is a chairperson. There are 10 ex officio members drawn from different line ministries of the Government of India, and there are 5 non-official members who are considered to be experts in biodiversity. Similarly, the conditions of chairman and members are governed under section 9, 10 and 11. These are administrative matters, so I am just skipping these. Similarly, the meetings of NBA, how they should meet, they are governed under section 12. The committees that can be constituted by NBA. NBA can constitute committees to advise the authority. So how these committees are constituted, that is provided under section 13. The officers and employees of NBA, how they have to be governed, that is covered under 14. Every order or decision of NBA has to be authenticated by the authorized officer. So far as NBA is concerned, the Secretary National Biodiversity Authority is the authorized officer who actually signs all the orders of the NBA. So that is governed under section 15. NBA can delegate some of its powers to its members, authority members. So that is provided under section 16. Expenses of NBA have to come from the Consolidated Fund of India. That is covered under section 17. Now coming to chapter 4, the functions and powers of NBA. As I told you, NBA has the full powers to regulate activities under section 3, 4 and 6. That means 3 pertains to research by a section 3(2) entity. Similarly, 3 also covers commercial utilization by section 3(2) entity. 4, as I told you earlier, it is pertaining to transfer of research results to a section 3(2) entity. And 6 pertains to patent. Whether you are an Indian or a foreigner, whether you are coming under section 7 or section 3(2), if you are applying for a patent, you have to come to NBA and take the approval. So when I tell approval, approval is granted in the form of agreement. So an agreement is signed based on mutual terms and conditions between NBA and the user or the patent applicant. And then the benefit sharing mechanism is fixed in the agreement, and the party is actually liable to pay the benefit sharing to NBA, and NBA in turn gives back this benefits, that is the financial benefits that is given by the users of biodiversity, to the various rural communities or to the biodiversity management committees or to the WAIDs or HAPIMs who have helped to provide the resources to these users. Similarly, NBA can also grant approval for taking any activity under section 3, 4 and 7. NBA is the authorized statutory body to provide advices to both the Union Government of India, as well as the state governments on all matters pertaining to biodiversity. And on behalf of the central government, NBA has been authorized to oppose grant of any intellectual property right in any country outside India on any biological resource obtained from India or any knowledge that is associated with the biological resource which has been derived from India. So section 19 provides for approval by NBA for undertaking certain activities. So as I told you, there is an application available online today, where the applicant actually can fill the details and pay the required fees, and then we process it and then provide the approvals within 60 days. So NBA can also inquire into any details provided by the applicant by consulting with the State Biodiversity Board or the Biodiversity Management Committees at the grassroots level, and then either it can approve the application or we can call the applicant for more details, or if the details are not satisfactory. For example, if the applicant wants some threatened species which is on the verge of extinction, then we can always reject the application. But before rejecting, we give an opportunity under section 19(3) of being heard. So every applicant is called to NBA on a virtual platform, and then we hear them before taking any decision. Coming to section 20, see, transfer of biological resource or knowledge by a person who has been granted approval under section 19. So section 20 actually pertains to transfer of biological resource or knowledge. Suppose if a person has obtained an approval under 19 and if he wants to again transfer it under transfer these biological resources, then section 20 comes into play. Similarly, section 21 pertains to determining equitable benefit sharing by NBA under section 19 and 20. So benefit sharing is in the form of both monetary compensation as well as non-monetary benefits. The Act provides for both. So the company can either provide the benefits in the form of grant, that is financial assistance, or it can share some non-monetary benefits. It can maybe they can build some community assets. The Act provides for non-monetary contribution as well. That is covered under section 21. Now coming to chapter 6. This is pertaining to State Biodiversity Board. How a State Biodiversity Board has to be established, that is covered under section 22. this, unlike the NBA, the SBB has chairman plus 5 ex-official members. In NBA we had 10, here it is only 5, plus 5 non-official members. Under section 23, the functions of SBB, State Biodiversity Boards, are prescribed. As I told you earlier, section 7 has to be linked with section 23(2). That is the powers of SBB to regulate by granting of approvals or otherwise requests for commercial utilization of bioutilization of a biological resource by an Indian. It also advises the state government on all matters pertaining to biodiversity. In fact, the honorable courts also can take the expert guidance of the state biodiversity boards or the National Biodiversity Authority whenever there is a application pertaining to biodiversity. So we are duty bound to respond to any demand or any notice from the courts, both the state biodiversity boards as well as the National Biodiversity Authority. Similarly, under section 24, the power of SBB to restrict certain activities violating the objectives of conservation. So section 7, 23(2) and 24 has to be linked to that will give a broad idea on the regulatory role of the state biodiversity boards. So prior intimation and SBB has to consult with the local bodies and then prohibit or restrict any activity which is contrary to the objectives of the Act. Under section 25, whatever provisions under section 9 and 17 to 17 were provided under section chapter 3 have been covered under section 25 for the State Biodiversity Board. So 9 to 17 pertains to NBA. Whatever was the provided under 9 to 17, that has been reflected so far as the State Biodiversity Board is concerned. Coming to chapter 7, that is pertaining to finance accounts and audit of NBA. How the money that has been received by National Biodiversity Authority has to be used. What is the grant or loan that has to be provided by the central government? How a National Biodiversity Fund has to be constituted. The annual reports of NBA, how it has to be prepared, and how the budget, accounts and audit of the accounts of the National Biodiversity Authority has to be undertaken, and how an annual report has to be prepared by the National Biodiversity Authority before and that has to be placed before Parliament every year. These are covered under section 26 to 30 under chapter 7. Similarly, under chapter 8, this pertains to the same activities, but it pertains to the state biodiversity boards. So the annual report has to be laid before the state legislature. Coming to chapter 9, that is the duties of the central and state government. Many a times what happens is citizens do not know when there is a destruction to biodiversity, what should be done. So many a times they go to the courts seeking judicial remedy. But the Act provides for a lot of duties for the state and central governments. Under section 36, central government has to develop national strategies and plans, sorry, not plans, it's plans for conservation of biological diversity. Central government can issue directives to the state governments to take any ameliorative measures where there is a threat to habitats by abuse or overuse or neglect of such areas. Similarly, section 36(4) says that central government can assess an environmental impact of projects affecting biodiversity and also regulate, manage or control risks associated with living modified organisms resulting from biotechnology. So of late, due to the advances of biotechnology, there are a lot of genetically modified organisms. How it should be regulated? Today there is a safety mechanism, there is a biosafety protocol called Cartagena Protocol across the world. Cartagena Protocol, India is also a party to that protocol, and today we have a biosafety mechanism to ensure that any genetically modified organism is properly safeguarded and the citizens are safeguarded from any use of such organisms. So such powers are given to the central government, and also if there is any large scale destruction to biodiversity, then central government is empowered to assess the environmental impact due to any project that is affecting the biodiversity. That is provided under section 36(4). Similarly, central government is also liable to respect and protect the traditional knowledge of the people relating to biodiversity. So this is the only act which gives powers to the government to protect the traditional knowledge that is available in the rural areas, and also to register them. So today every local body is expected to prepare a people's biodiversity register, and the biodiversity or biological diversity available in a particular jurisdiction of the local body is actually captured in the people's biodiversity register. This register is expected to be prepared by the people themselves through the biodiversity management committee. That has to be validated, and in this register all the traditional knowledge also is captured and it is safeguarded. It is considered to be a secret document. So anyone who wants to access the people's biodiversity register, they will have to approach the state biodiversity board and the biodiversity management committee at the grassroots level, and then pay the required benefit sharing before accessing any traditional knowledge. Now coming to section 37, the state governments have been empowered to notify certain areas which are rich in biodiversity as biodiversity heritage sites. Similarly, under section 38, the central government can notify a particular species as a threatened species, which is on the verge of extinction. So we have notified a lot of species, both plant species and animal species, and the overall policy decision is taken that when a request is coming for accessing a threatened species, then the National Biodiversity Authority or the State Biodiversity Board takes due precaution while giving approvals. Similarly, when a species is declared as a threatened species, then we take adequate measures to ensure that that species is not only conserved but also propagated. Coming to section 39, the central government has powers to designate certain institutions as national repositories which can safely keep the biological material that has been accessed as a voucher specimen. So today there are about 60 national repositories in India. So whenever NBA is giving an approval, we insist that the accessed material, that voucher specimen, has to be kept in safe custody in one of the repositories. Then coming to section 40. This is most tricky section of the Act. So I request all the esteemed participants to pay attention to this section, section 40. This has given powers to central government to exempt certain biological resources. If there is a species which is normally traded as a commodity, then that species can be notified under section 40 to exempt them from the provisions of the Act. So if you take in respect of agriculture, most of the agriculture crops have now been exempted under the purview of the Act, from the purview of the Act. Today there are about 421 species that includes both agricultural crops as well as medicinal plants, spices, which have been broadly exempted from the purview of the Act. Once a species is notified under section 40, the person who is collecting these species, accessing these species for the purpose for which this species has been normally traded as a commodity, then the user need not pay any benefit sharing. But today we are not permitting it for patents. When it comes to patents, we are insisting that this exemption clause is not applicable. But when it comes to commercial utilization, biosurvey, bio-utilization or research. Not for research, only for commercial utilization, biosurvey and biosurvey and bio-utilization. Any species which is notified under section 40, the user need not pay any benefit sharing. It is exempted. If that species is used for a purpose for which has been used for many decades or centuries. If the product, say for example, say coconut is cultivated primarily for kernel or for its kernel or for its oil. So if a user is using coconut to make coconut oil, the manufacturer need not come to NBA to take any approval. So if the product is used as for a commodity which is normally existing in practice, then that practice is actually exempted under section 40. Now coming to chapter 10 of the Act, this pertains to biodiversity management committees. So every local body, both at the panchayat level, that is at the village level, at the block level, and at the district level, is expected to constitute a biodiversity management committee. Today there are about 270,000 biodiversity management committees present in India. Thanks to the Honorable National Green Tribunal Principal Bench, Delhi, based on its direction, all the state governments have complied with its order. And today, almost all local bodies have a biodiversity management committee. So section 41 actually describes on how a BMC or the biodiversity management committee is to be constituted. So there has to be representation for women, for people of coming from the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe communities, and how the BMCs have to be constituted. That has been adequately captured under section 41. NBA and SBBs shall consult BMCs while taking any decisions on approvals. Also, the Act has given powers to BMCs to levy charges by way of collection fees from any person accessing a biological resource. So the BMC is entitled for two types of benefits. One is through the benefit sharing that comes from the State Biodiversity Board or from the National Biodiversity Authority when they are signing agreements with the users, and then the financial benefits are handed over to the NBA or SBB, that gets transferred to the BMC. Also, the BMC themselves have been given powers to levy charges. It's like a toll charges at the time of collecting any biological resources from their villages. Chapter 11 pertains to local biodiversity fund. So how the funds that accrue to the BMCs have to be managed, constitution of a local biodiversity fund, how it has to be utilized, how a BMC has to prepare an annual report, how these funds have to be audited, and how this report has to be submitted before the district magistrate of every district have been adequately captured under section 42 to 47. Now I move to the last chapter that is most relevant to the judiciary. This is the last chapter of the Act. So under section 48, NBA is bound by the decisions of the central government. Similarly, the powers of the state government to give directions are also captured under section 49. If there is any dispute between different state biodiversity boards, then NBA has been given powers as a civil court to resolve such disputes. Say for example, a company accesses some biological resource, say an Ayush company, from 3 states, say Uttarakhand, Himachal and say Sikkim. But he is only paying the benefit sharing to only one state. Then there is a dispute. So such disputes have to be referred to the National Biodiversity Authority, and NBA has been given the powers of the civil court to resolve such disputes, and every proceeding of NBA is treated as a judicial proceeding. Similarly, under section 51, the members, officers of NBA and SBBs are deemed as public servants. Section 52 is very important so far as judiciary is concerned. It is actually appeal procedures. So today what is happening is in India, if there is a person or a company who is aggrieved by a decision taken by the National Biodiversity Authority or by a state biodiversity board, both are statutory institutions, the aggrieved party straight away goes to the High Court or to the Chief Judicial Magistrate or the District Judge. The point to be noted is that under section 52A, any person aggrieved by any determination of benefit sharing or any orders issued by the National Biodiversity Authority or the State Biodiversity Board has to file an appeal only before the National Green Tribunal. I don't know why they avoid the NGT. They simply go to the Honorable High Courts or the District Courts or the Magistrate Courts and file complaints, because these courts are already overburdened and it takes a lot of time for the High Courts and District Courts to adjudicate these cases. And till such time the adjudication procedure is over, the applicant always keeps informing the NBA or SBBs that it is sub judice. So it takes many years. Unfortunately, I would tell that even in NJT Chennai, hardly there are any cases pertaining to BD Act, though they are the authorized courts that has to actually adjudicate any appeals. But stakeholders prefer High Courts and District Courts just to buy time. So whenever appeal is preferred before the judiciary, under section 52, it is mandatory on the part of the aggrieved person to first approach the National Green Tribunal. Only if he is aggrieved by the decision of the NGT, then only he can go for an appeal before the higher court. Now coming to section 53. Any execution of determination of orders by the NBA or SBBs or the orders of the High Court based on an appeal shall be deemed to be a decree of the civil court and has to be executed accordingly. Section 54 states that all actions that are taken in good faith will be protected. So there will not be any suit, prosecution or legal proceedings against any officer who is done a job in good faith while implementing the provisions of the Act. Now coming to section 55, this is the penal clause. If there is a contravention of section 3, 4 or 6 of the Act, it is punishable with imprisonment for up to 5 years or with fine which may extend up to 10 lakh. So all the section 32 entities, that is the foreigners, NRIs, companies incorporated outside India, companies incorporated within India but have a shareholding from a foreigner or share or participation in the management by a foreigner, then such entities or persons are liable to be imprisoned for up to 5 years or with fine of up to 10 lakh. Or if the damage caused to the biodiversity is more than 10 lakh, accordingly the damage can be realized by the courts. Similarly, when it comes to section 7, that is purely Indians, if there is a violation on account of accessing a resource without approval from the State Biodiversity Board, the person is liable to be imprisoned for up to 3 years or to pay fine of up to 5 lakhs or both fine and imprisonment. Now coming to section 56. If there is a contravention of the directions or orders of the central government, state government, National Biodiversity or the State Biodiversity Authority, all these 4 bodies can impose a fine of up to 1 lakh in the first instance. Suppose the contravention continues. For the second contravention, they can impose a fine of up to 2 lakhs. Still the person is not willing to abide by the orders. Neither he is going to courts for taking any judicial remedy. He is just willfully violating the law. Then on a daily basis, we can impose a fine of up to 2 lakh rupees. Till such time, the default continues. With respect to section 57, any offense committed by the company, the person who is in charge of the company shall be directly held responsible for the offense unless he proves that he had taken due diligence to prevent that offense. Unless he proves that he is innocent, the person who is responsible or in charge of the company is liable under the provisions of the Act. Under section 58, all offences committed under this Act are both cognizable and non-bailable. Section 59 says that the Act is in addition to the other acts. It is not in conflict with other acts. This Act, the Biological Diversity Act, is in addition to and not in derogation of the provisions in any other law for the time being in force pertaining to forests and wildlife. So it will complement the other forest laws. If it is a Wildlife Act or a FRA Act, Forest Rights Act, or Indian Forest Act, this law complements that. It will not be in conflict with the other law. Section 60 says that central government has powers to give directions to the state government. Section 61 says that we know that under section 58, all the offences are cognizable. Who has to take cognizance of these offences? The Government of India has notified in the official gazette that all officers above the rank of range officers in the forest department are authorized to take cognizance of the offence. Simultaneously, NBA or the SBBs or the BMCs also can file a complaint before the courts. Section 62 actually provides for powers to the central government to make rules. Section 63 provides for powers to state government to make rules. Section 64 provides for powers to make regulations by NBA, National Biodiversity Authority. So today there is a regulation notified in 2014 which actually prescribes the benefit sharing mechanism. So this power is derived from section 64. And section 65 envisages that the central government has powers to remove difficulties for implementing the Act for 2 years from the date of enactment. So I am just concluding now. Then I have only 2-3 slides now. So this is how we are fixing the benefit sharing component. This is based on the ABS guidelines 2014. So if a company's ex-factory gross sale is up to 1 crore, he has to pay 10,000 rupees, 0.1%. So if today I am doing a business and if I am selling products worth 1 crore rupee, I have to give 10,000 rupees to the communities which are actually providing the raw material. It's a very, very small percentage, 0.1%. And if it is between 1 crore to 3 crore, it is 0.2%. If it is more than 3 crore sale value, it is 0.5%. And if there is a transfer of research from the person who has conducted the research to a third party who is a 3-2 entity, then the benefit sharing obligation on the person who is accessing the research is between 3 to 5% of the monetary consideration. And when it comes to patents, if the patent applicant himself commercializes the product, then he has to pay 0.2 to 1% of the ex-factory gross sale. The benefit sharing is slightly higher because he gets monopoly over the resource. So that is why we have kept a higher benefit sharing. Similarly, if the patent actually assigns his patent, he does not want to use the product or process by himself. He wants to sell it or assign it or license it. Then he has to pay 3 to 5% of the fees received. And every year he will be getting a royalty from the person who is actually buying this patent. So on a yearly basis, he has to pay 2 to 5% of the royalty to the communities who have actually given the traditional knowledge or the biological resource. which has helped him to get the patent. And when it comes to transfer of access to biological resource, say I have got the approval and I have got the approval from NBA, but I think that I don't want the resource now. I am going to transfer it to a Section 3(2) entity. Then the monetary consideration of what I will be getting, 2 to 5% will be considered as a benefit sharing that will be given to the communities through National Biodiversity Authority. These are some of the landmark judgments. I have only taken 5 different landmark judgments which I felt that I can share it with you. One is the Divya Pharmacy case. This is a very well-known case where the company went to Uttarakhand High Court against the orders of the State Biodiversity Board, claiming that State Biodiversity Board does not have the powers to regulate under the Act, and also they don't have powers to levy any benefit sharing. But the Honorable High Court of Uttarakhand, in its landmark judgment in writ petition 3437/2016, made it very clear that Section 7 has to be seen along with Section 23(2) and 24. They ruled that state biodiversity boards have the powers to regulate access of biological resources within the state. If you are an Indian, of course, if you are not an Indian, if you are a foreigner, you have to come to NBA. But if you are a pure Indian, because Divya Pharmacy does not have any foreign shareholding, it is not a listed company. There are no foreigners in its management. So they thought that they need not come under the purview of the Act, but the Uttarakhand High Court had made it very clear that SBB, State Biodiversity Board, have the powers to regulate biological resource access as well as to determine benefit sharing. Similarly, the Chandrapal Singh case, the principal bench of the Honorable NJT Delhi, in a landmark judgment in OA 347/2016, directed all the state governments to complete the process of BMC formation and PBR preparation within 6 months. This actually activated all the state governments, and within a year, all the BMCs were constituted. It was a major actually development so far as the BD Act is concerned. I will share all the judgments in PDF format to all the participants. Then coming to another judgment that was issued by Honorable Additional Chief Metropolitan Magistrate. Here the petitioner was the Karnataka State Biodiversity Board. They filed a complaint before the Honorable Additional Chief Metropolitan Magistrate Bangalore against Mrs. Pradhan Herbal Company, and magistrate in their order they imposed a penalty of 25,000 rupees on all the companies which has illegally accessed resources without the approval of the State Biodiversity Board. In another judgment by the High Court of Tamil Nadu, Chennai High Court, in WPC 15663/2014, the applicant actually went to the High Court telling that the BD Act per se is actually violating Section 14 and 21 of the Act. It is violating the fundamental rights of the Act. But the Honorable High Court actually dismissed this petition, telling that it is very well within the constitutional provisions. The Act is very well within the constitutional provisions. Similarly, in another judgment by the Honorable NJT Central Zone Bhopal, actually the BMC was the applicant petitioner. They went to the NJT telling that some biodiversity parks which were coming up in their jurisdiction are actually destroying the biodiversity. The Honorable NJT actually took the report from the government and the NBA and dismissed the petition, and then gave a ruling that the prayer is not admissible because the biodiversity parks in fact actually helped in protecting the biodiversity in that particular area. So these are some of the few judgments I thought I will just share it with you. But still there is a long way to go, because so far as the jurisprudence of this Act is concerned, it is very, very less compared to the other acts. I am now concluding. BD Act is a very unique legislation enacted in modern India. It has helped to conserve our biological resources and precious traditional knowledge, which has been preserved for centuries. it has actually helped to incentivize the people who have been conserving our biological resources and traditional knowledge. And these people are actually living in very, very marginalized economies, primarily in forest and rural areas. And they have been the major source of biological resources and associated knowledge. The Act has immense potential to increase the income of the farmers and local people and tribal communities. It is a classic act where corporate India can help rural India. But unfortunately, the stakeholders actually have their own way of interpreting the various provisions of the Act. They have been approaching the judiciary for various judicial remedies, like they keep claiming that even now that state biodiversity boards do not have powers to grant approvals. Even after the verdict of the Honorable High Court of Uttarakhand, they have again filed a appeal before the division bench. Of course, it is not yet admitted. And they still claim that SBBs should not be given the powers to fix any benefit sharing. Similarly, the seed industry also claims that we are doing conventional breeding, but so whatever privilege you are giving to a normal foreigner, normal farmer should be given to us also. Similarly, there is always a confusion between a value-added product or with the byproduct or an extract. So people actually produce value-added product, produce a byproduct, then they claim it is a value-added product. So this confusion keeps coming up unless the applicant proves that it is a value-added product that he has accessed. He is liable to pay the benefit sharing under the provisions of the Act. Now the challenges and way forward. Of course, there is lack of awareness. We in NBA, we are trying our level best to propagate the various powers, responsibilities vested with the stakeholders, both the providers as well as the users, overall for the cause of conservation. And ABS as is to be seen as an incentive to the conservers. See, a tribal who collects whole day for rupees 100 or 120 rupees he gets. And then for him, that is a source of livelihood. Collecting some herbs from the forest is a source of livelihood. He collects whole day and gives it to a tribal community, a tribal cooperative society without knowing its actual value. Say, for example, aloe vera. Aloe vera at the source, either at the farming level by the farmers or the tribals, they sell it at about 7 to 8 rupees per kilo. But products, cosmetic products coming out of aloe vera, all the beautification products, are from 1 kilo. It is estimated that the commercial products that are produced is about 8,000 rupees. So there is about 1,000 rupees gain by the companies. So we are only asking the companies to share a small portion of their benefits of up to 0.1 to 0.5% to the people, which can be used by the communities for their own socio-economic development. Then there is also a need to strengthen the SBBs and BMCs. BMCs, as I told you, it was only in the Chandrapal Singh case after the order of the Honorable Principal Bench of NJT, which was a very, very welcome order because it activated all the state governments to complete this process. But there is a long way to go to strengthen the BMCs and empower them. Similarly, monitoring of the stakeholders outside the country and within the country is a big challenge for NBA because we are tracking them, but it's a challenging process. So we are taking the help of information technology. We have recently devised a software by which we will be able to track whatever resources are being used to take patent outside India, so that we can oppose the grant of patents. The idea is that if a person is using our Indian resource from provided by an Indian community, he has to be compensated. So the challenge is also to convince the industries to abide by the Act and try to help our rural communities. And as I told you, there is a great need for more jurisprudence pertaining to the BD Act because not many judgments have come. Unless more judgments come, the confusions will remain. And this is one area where the judiciary can play a major role to help effective implementation of the BD Act. I stop here, sir, and I stop here. I think I have exceeded my time, but I will be happy to take your questions, sir.